China has frozen the disbursement of loans to Kenya, citing discomfort over Kenya's request to extend the debt repayment holiday to December from an earlier deadline of June. Consequently, Chinese-funded projects face a cash crunch, with contractors reporting delayed payments from banks like Exim Bank. It has been reported that payment to contractors working on Chinese projects and paid under the direct method have delayed since last month. The direct method involves Kenyan firms with Chinese loans sending notices for supplier payments to Chinese banks through the Treasury. In January of this year, China and other rich countries under the Debt Service Suspension Initiative gave Kenya a 6-month debt repayment relief. Now Kenya is seeking deals to suspend debt service with these nations under the Paris Club and other creditors, including China, covering the 6 months to the end of December 2021. The G20 countries, including Belgium, Canada, Denmark, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, the Republic of Korea, Spain, and the U.S., rescheduled payments of 32.9 billion Kenyan shillings in principal and interest due between January and June to the next 4 years with a 1-year grace period. Today, we're focusing on the issues that have sprung up over Kenya's debt reprieve. I'm Tolulokwe Adelere Balogun. Welcome. This is Business Edge. Joining me now from Nairobi, Kenya, is Ken Gichinga. He's the chief economist for Mentoria Economics, and we'll be going through this issue with him. Ken, good afternoon, your time. Once again, thank you for joining me on Business Edge.
Thank you for having me, Tolulope.
So before we get into the new reprieve that Kenya is seeking, let's take a quick look at what has brought us to this current point we stand now. The Debt Service Suspension Initiative came from the World Bank and the IMF and included some 73 countries that were eligible. Now, what made international lenders and creditors agree to this initiative?
I think it had to be the realization that COVID is real. Not only has it presented a health pandemic, but it also presented an economic pandemic. And to the extent that countries are able to raise tax revenue, that's a very difficult situation because of the containment measures. This is so governments are not able to raise sufficient revenue to be able to pay those taxes and to be able to service those debts. So I think the reality is because of those revenue strains under the DSSI framework, those extensions were granted running from January to June.
So there were some requirements for countries like Kenya that needed to be met for them to be able to take part in the DSSI initiative. 73 countries overall were eligible in the long run. So what were some of those criteria that needed to be met?
Well, from Kenya's perspective, it's slightly a bit more challenging because first Kenya had declined that framework because it felt that its ability not to service debt might affect its ratings on other commercial fronts. But later on, Kenya became a signatory to that and accepted because it was true that the fiscal situation was affecting the country quite significantly. Some of the conditions really included that countries can't look for debt in other areas and really had to try to contain their fiscal deficit to within international standards. These are some of the criteria that were read.
Okay, so let's bring it up to speed now. So according to the World Bank, the initiative has helped countries concentrate their resources on fighting the pandemic and safeguarding the lives and livelihoods of millions of people in vulnerable places. Now, since it took effect on May 1st, 2020, they say that the initiative has delivered more than $5 billion in relief to more than 40 eligible countries. So what would you say Kenya has gained from being part of the DSSI initiative under the World Bank and the IMF?
Well, I think the key gain has been the money that would have been used to servicing debt now has been put towards social infrastructure, strengthening hospitals, being able to put up a COVID response, being able to also secure schools, some of which were being used as containment zones when the pandemic really struck. So I think the money went to where it should always be going towards the people, and that's part of the reason Kenya is requesting for another 6 months, because we are not yet out of the woods.
So that's my next point now. So Kenya is asking for another 6 months of this relief. This is a request that seems to have put China on edge, possibly putting others on edge as well. But let's go more into specifics. What do you think is really driving the need for Kenya to ask for a further extension on this?
Obviously, businesses are not back to where they used to be. If you look at revenue collection, it's improving, but it's not where it needs to be. Last year, the government gave a lot of tax reprieves to Kenyans to be able to contain the pandemic, and the government feels that it's not yet been able to recoup the taxes required. So I think that's the primary reason, but also there are, I think, the secondary reasons are really around the need for stimulus. Government owes suppliers about 300 million shillings, and it needs that money to be able to pay off suppliers who provided services. So I think all these things are coming up to create this perfect storm, and that's why the committee is requesting for another 6 months.
Okay, so if Kenya is to get this 6 months, this would make a year of debt suspension. The original period was set to end December 31st, 2020, but now has been extended through December 2021. But it is very doubtful that Kenya would have actually gotten back on sure footing by December. The World Bank says Kenya is at high risk of external debt distress and at high risk of overall debt distress. What options do you think are open to Kenya beyond December 2021 as we look at this debt situation?
Well, one of the op-eds that I penned in one of the local papers here, I said that Kenya needs to review its tax policy. We need to have a good tax policy that can help the government to raise revenue without distorting businesses and becoming a barrier to business progress. We need to find that sweet spot between production tax, and consumption tax. Right now, the government has been putting so much emphasis on consumption tax. These are the VAT, these are the excise tax, so even things like digital mobile loans are under VAT, airtime is under VAT, and it's becoming very difficult for even people in the digital economy to be able to participate because of these expensive access to data and mobile money. So I think we really need to rethink how we raise taxes in a legitimate way, else we're constantly going to find ourselves in this difficult situation.
All right, Ken, let's hold on. This conversation started with me pointing out that China is putting a hold on the disbursement of loans to Kenya because of the request for a further extension on the debt suspension. When we come back after the break, we get into the Chinese angle of this conversation. This is Business Edge. Stay with us. This is Business Edge, and still joining me from Nairobi, Kenya is Ken Kichinga. He is the chief economist at Mentoria Economics, and we're looking at China and Kenya's conversation around their debt right now. So let's look at this Chinese angle. So China is one of Kenya's biggest foreign creditors, and they've lent about 758 billion Kenyan shillings. That's about $7.02 billion as at April 2021. It's been said that this has come over the past decade to build rail lines, roads, and other infrastructure, as well as different projects. But China has now said they're uncomfortable with Kenya's request for an extension of their debt suspension. So do you think that China has valid reasons to be concerned or to be a little, let's say, apprehensive about this request for an extension?
Obviously, the debt concerns around Kenya have raised eyebrows within the international community, and the Treasury has tried to play those concerns down by saying the outlook is very favorable. I've said that the China we are talking to right now is a much bolder China than we are used to. Few years ago, China used to be accused by the Western powers of indebting foreign countries, and it always used to be on the defensive, trying to object those accusations. But what we're seeing right now is a much more bolder China, a much more assertive China. If you listen to the speech last week by President Xi Jinping on the 100th anniversary of the Communist Party, he was very bullish about China in the new world. So expect China now to require new terms of reference with not just Kenya, but with other African countries. And I think it will be reminding these countries that it is an emerging superpower and will need to be addressed differently.
That's interesting. That speech really did set a lot of people on edge, also put people on notice as well, both financially and in terms of political power that China is willing to wield, not just here on the continent, but around the world. So a part of this conversation is that many of the lenders in China are also commercial entities that need to make a profit from these loans, make a profit from the transactions they're involved in with the Kenyan government and Kenyan departments and ministries, as it could be. Could this be seen as a breach of contracts with the terms of reference, with the loan agreement terms, outside of the special need that we've seen because of the pandemic?
I think you've actually gone to the heart of the problem. When Kenya is negotiating for a debt suspension extension with the Paris Club and the G20 members, of which China is a part of, that's one conversation. But our relationship with China is a bit different from the Paris Club and other G20 members, in the sense that most loans coming from China are really coming from the commercial entities, unlike the loans from Europe and the Paris Club players. So China is in a very strange situation where it is a member of the G20 and it really wants to be part of this DSSI framework, but it's not really in control of the loans, because most of these loans coming from China are commercial in nature, and there are people who stand to make a loss if those terms are breached. So I think that's why China wants to be wants to go with these negotiations in a separate trajectory and not being bungled among the G20 entities.
And I find that interesting because China too has made mention of that they have negotiated their debt relief deals separately, but applying some of the same terms as the majority of the G20 countries have. What do you think is going to come of this, bringing up this conversation? Is everybody going to be on board with Kenya, I beg your pardon, getting this debt suspension extension at this point in time, particularly China? Do you think the G20 on the other side and Paris Club and others will be on one side and China might be the only holdouts because they are negotiating their deals separately? What do you think is going to end with this request?
Well, I think it's going to be a case of who blinks first, and expect that China will, really reading from the leader's speech last week, try to be a bit more assertive. And they have been assertive because right now they have refused to disburse any further loans, which will affect many projects in the country. That said, officials at the ministries have said that conversations are live. They are going on as we speak. So I think and Kenya still remains very strategic to China's road and Belt and Road Initiative. So I think there will be that meeting of minds later on. But I think this will be a case study for African countries that are negotiating terms of trade with China, that the China is willing to be far more assertive than in the past.
Okay, I want to go back to the DSSI that was set up by the World Bank and the IMF, because I found something quite interesting there. So for countries that were part of this initiative, borrowers committed to use freed up resources to increase social, health, or economic spending in response to the COVID-19 crisis. They were to disclose all public sector financial commitments, including debt and debt-like instruments. They were also to limit their non-concessional borrowing to levels agreed under IMF programs and the World Bank's non-concessional borrowing policies. And you made mention of this earlier. So my question to you here is, in the 6 months that China I beg your pardon, Kenya has been part of this DSSI, and with the 6 months extension that they're asking for, has Kenya done all of these things that were meant to be done? Have they been transparent with their debts and debt-like instruments? Have they used the money that's been freed up for social health and economic spending in the country? Has Kenya lived up to its part of the deal?
It's been partially yes and partially no. Obviously, you'll recall the IMF really stepped in when Kenyans went to the IMF website saying Kenya is receiving so many loans and it's not very clear where these loans were going. And the IMF really stepped in to try and foster greater transparency and has required that the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Authority be more involved in understanding where the fundings are going to and who are getting these big tenders that are being pushed out. Then there was the issue of the Eurobond. Kenya floated its fourth Eurobond, obviously raising its debt levels slightly a bit higher to be able to meet some obligations. So it's been challenging because Kenya still has to meet its obligations to its citizens in terms of service delivery, in terms of paying salaries, in terms of being able to meet its international obligations. But it's happening at a time when the pandemic really has made the economic situation that much harder. So I think Kenya has tried its best, but definitely there have been a few gaps.
We will have to continue conversations around the debt trap or the debt sink that many African countries have found themselves. It's a continuous conversation. And we've seen that debt levels were elevated before the crisis, but the crisis has now even pushed debt levels to historic heights. And we're struggling. It's very honest. Nigeria is struggling. South Africa is struggling. Different countries across the continent are struggling with their debt repayments. But specifically for Kenya now, what do you think the country can do in order to start climbing out of this debt trap? Beyond the pandemic, beyond these extensions, they will end one day eventually, and the creditors and the borrowers will come knocking at the door for repayments. What's the next step? What are the moves that Kenya needs to make?
Have always argued that we need to stimulate the economy. Too many businesses have shut down even before the pandemic, and we need to stimulate the economy by injecting liquidity. When businesses start operating, they hire more people and they're able to pay more taxes, and government now has revenue to be able to meet its international obligations. If you look at the states, they really pursued monetary stimulus in the US. And the US, if you look at their latest numbers, unemployment is low and businesses are thriving. So I think it's important that businesses get back to doing what they do best. And that can only happen when there's enough monetary stimulus. As I said earlier, the government owes our businesses about 300 billion shillings in terms of unpaid supplier bills. If that 300 billion was released today and pumped into the economy, so many businesses would be able to get up and running, and they will be able to make the money and pay those taxes easily. I think that has to be the starting point. And once money is available, then government can be able to tax using a good tax policy and be able to raise revenue to meet its local and international obligations.
All right, Ken Gichinga, thank you as always for joining me out of Nairobi, Kenya. Do have a pleasant day.
Same to you. Thanks for having me.
All right. The conversation around what will happen next between China and Kenya is one that we will be watching closely, as will many other African countries who may also seek an extension to their debt relief initiatives. We'll let you know what the update is, but right now we still have one or two more things to do on Business Edge, and up next is the Tiger Wit Weekly Forecast. And the weekly forecast, they're letting you know what events and what to look out for as the week develops on the market. But we will be wrapping things up, giving you a few stories we're keeping our eyes on right here at Business Edge. And we start with this. Professor Akpan Ekpo, an economist, has urged Nigeria to collaborate with countries like Ghana, Senegal, and Cote d'Ivoire to inaugurate the ECO single currency to boost regional trade and economic growth in the ECOWAS sub-region. His advice came against the backdrop of the new roadmap agreed by the heads of state of the Economic Community of West African States to launch the ECO single currency in 2027. The Kenya Revenue Authority will impose a fine and penalty for firms and individuals who do not file their annual returns before the deadline. Taxpayers will be charged for late filing of tax returns pegged at 2,000 shillings or 5% of the tax due, whichever is higher for individuals, while the penalty for income tax for non-individuals is 20,000 Kenyan shillings or 5% of the tax due, whichever is higher. South Africa's recovery may well be on its way as government finances showed a significant improvement in May due to rising tax revenue despite restricted economic activity. Data from Statistics SA showed that the government recorded a relatively modest budget deficit in May of 5.4 billion rand. This was a significant improvement compared to the deficit of 52.4 billion rand in May of last year at the height of the strict lockdown. However, Statistics SA said that the fiscus remained constrained to recover to pre-pandemic levels. And finally, a representative of the owners and insurers of the Ever Given, the container ship that blocked the Suez Canal in March, said that a formal agreement has been agreed with the Canal Authority to allow the vessel to be released. The Suez Canal Authority has held the giant ship and its crew in a lake between two stretches of the waterway since it was dislodged on March 29th, amid a dispute over a demand for compensation by the SCA. And that's all we have for you on this edition of Business Edge. Head to our website, our YouTube channel, and of course our mobile app, which you can take us with you wherever you go for all the stories, financial, economic, and business emanating from the continent. Watch us live on StarTimes 274, and I'll be back 11 a.m. West African time tomorrow as we take a look at what's developing money-wise on the continent. I'm Tolu Lokwe. Adileri Balogun. Do have a fantastic day.